What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't just forgotten, I was deleted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confrontation or a screaming match. It was something far worse, a quiet, subtle discovery that hit me in the middle of my chest like a slow-burning acid, and once it started, it didn't stop. It was Christmas Eve, just last year, and Becca had sent out the annual family newsletter, one of those overly cheerful, self-congratulatory email blasts she insists on putting together every holiday season. It always starts the same, a photo of the whole family, which really means her family, then a long, meandering list of her kids' achievements, Mitch's latest golf tournament wins, and Mom's new ceramic hobbies. My name would usually show up once, at the very bottom, right after the family dog and just before a recipe for fig tart. But this year, it was different. This year, the photos were bigger, glossier, and there were more of them. And as I scrolled through them on my laptop, eating leftover Chinese food at my kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment, I noticed something strange. There I was, in the original photo, I mean. I remembered the day clearly. It was from Thanksgiving at Mom's house, the one where I brought the pumpkin pie and no one touched it. We had taken a group shot in front of the fireplace, all of us standing shoulder to shoulder, doing our best to smile through the tension that always hovered just below the surface like a bad smell. Except in the version she sent out, I wasn't in the picture. Not even tucked into the background. No weird angle or blur. I was just gone. Cleanly and deliberately cropped out, the rest of the family shifted in tighter, like I had never been there at all. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she chose the wrong version or accidentally uploaded a different file. But as I kept scrolling, my stomach dropped. There were more photos, at least 10 of them, and in every single one where I knew I'd been present, I was missing. It wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. A choice. And the worst part? No one had mentioned it. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not even Becca. It was like the family had made a silent agreement. Karen doesn't really need to be in the pictures. Karen doesn't fit. I called Becca that night, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to sound like I cared as much as I did. She answered on the third ring, already halfway into a glass of wine, probably watching her kids wrap presents while Mitch pretended to help. When I asked her about the photos, asked her why I wasn't in them, she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a dismissive one. Like I was being dramatic. She said, "Oh, you know how those group shots are. We had to crop for the layout. The email app cuts people out sometimes. Don't take it personally, Care." I didn't say anything at first, just stared at my screen while she talked. My name isn't Care. I hate that nickname. It sounds like a mistake. And in that moment, I realized that's exactly what I'd become to them, an accident. A filler. Someone they edited around, like clutter in the background of a perfect living room photo. That night, I poured myself a drink, just one, and opened a folder on my computer labeled Family Photos. I scrolled through images dating back 15, 20 years. Christmases, birthdays, weddings, graduations. One after another. And what I saw hit harder than I expected. In the early years, I was there, smack in the middle, smiling like I believed I belonged. As the years went on, I moved to the side. Then further. Then I was barely visible. Then, slowly, the pattern repeated, cropped, faded, ignored. My presence in the family albums was like a ghost, getting fainter and fainter until it vanished. You know what hurts more than being left out? Realizing you never really mattered enough to be included in the first place. You were there, but you weren't seen. And when you were seen, they edited you out of their memories with such casual ease, you begin to wonder if you ever existed for them in the first place. That night I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, I was. But because the hurt felt old. Familiar. Like something I'd carried for years without knowing its name. And now it had one, invisible. That was me. The family's placeholder. The quiet one. The dependable one. The one who'd never caused trouble. The one who always showed up, brought the napkins, helped clean the dishes, and then disappeared from the story like she was never part of it. Have you ever looked back at a photo and realized you were erased on purpose? Not forgotten. Erased. Tell me in the comments. I'm not the only one, right? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Something had shifted. Something fundamental. I started thinking not about what I'd lost, but what I still had. And that's when the idea started forming, not fully, not clearly, but just enough to sink its claws into me. If they wouldn't let me be part of their story, then maybe I'd write my own. One they couldn't crop, edit, or delete. They always said I was the quiet one, the one who didn't need the spotlight. But they forgot one important thing. I work in marketing. I know exactly how to get people to look. And this time, I wasn't asking for attention. I was going to take it. It's funny how memory works, not in neat lines or tidy boxes, but like smoke creeping under doors, pulling you into rooms you thought you'd locked up years ago. After that night, when I saw myself erased from a holiday I'd spent half the afternoon setting the table for, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not all at once like in the movies, but gradually, like a faucet that starts to leak and doesn't stop. I started seeing everything differently, conversations I used to shrug off, glances I used to ignore, invitations that never quite made it my way, and jokes that always seemed to end with me being the punchline. What I used to call family traditions, I now started to recognize as carefully repeated patterns, designed not to hurt me, but to exclude me so thoroughly and subtly that I wouldn't even realize it was happening until it had become a lifetime. It started small. I remembered my 12th birthday party. Well, the party Becca had, anyway. It was one of those shared events where our birthdays were close enough together that Mom decided it was more practical to do it all at once. Becca got the cake she wanted, chocolate with blue icing, a Barbie doll sticking out of the top, dressed like a princess. I got nothing. No theme. No presents labeled with just my name. Even the party hats were pink because that's Becca's favorite. At the time, I remember telling myself I didn't care. I even laughed when Becca's friends pretended I was the weird older cousin instead of the actual birthday girl. I'd convinced myself I was above it, that I didn't need attention, that needing things made you weak. But now, at 53, I can admit to myself that all I really wanted was one moment, just one, where someone saw me first. That pattern continued, stretching across decades like a shadow cast by a building you didn't know you were standing under. When Becca got engaged, she asked me to be her maid of honor, but not because we were close or because she valued me. She asked because she needed someone who would do the job without making a fuss, someone who wouldn't compete for attention, someone who'd organize everything and then fade into the background. I didn't get a toast at the reception. My dress didn't fit right, but I didn't complain. I remember standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching her spin around in that over-the-top gown while Mom cried and Dad clapped like she'd cured cancer, and I felt invisible. Again. Even the way they talked about me was soaked in this quiet, condescending dismissal. Karen's just independent. She likes her own space. She's not really a people person. That was their way of explaining why I was never included in weekend barbecues or family beach trips, why I wasn't in the photo albums or the group chats or the stories they told at the table when I was sitting right there. It was easier for them to pretend I didn't care than to admit they never made room for me in the first place. What hurt more than anything, though, wasn't the parties or the presents or even the photos. It was the realization that I had internalized all of it. I had learned to speak their language of self-erasure so fluently that I did it to myself. I'd say no to invitations before they even offered them, laugh off the lack of birthday calls, pretend I was just busy when I was sitting in the same house, 3 miles away, with a fridge full of leftovers and no one to eat them with. I made it easy for them to forget me, because somewhere along the line, I believed I wasn't worth remembering. But now I see it. I see the pattern. The way they used politeness like a weapon. The way they built a family structure where there was no room for someone like me unless I was willing to be smaller, quieter, easier. I see how they shaped their memories to exclude the parts that didn't flatter them. And most of all, I see how much energy they spent pretending everything was fine, pretending I was fine, when the truth was sitting right there in the silence between us, growing louder every year. You know what the cruelest part of emotional neglect is? It doesn't scream. It whispers. It erodes. It's not a slap across the face, it's 1,000 glances over your shoulder that never quite meet your eyes. It's being told you're part of something while slowly being pushed out of the frame until one day you're gone and no one notices. After I saw those cropped photos, I started collecting them. Not just from this year's email, but from years past. I went digging through Mom's Facebook, Becca's Instagram, even Dad's old digital camera archives. I found photo after photo after photo, Thanksgiving tables, Christmas trees, baby showers, graduations, and in each one, I could trace my disappearance like a forensic trail. My face turned into a shoulder, a hand, a sliver of hair. Eventually, nothing. They didn't crop me out because I ruined the photos. They cropped me out because my presence didn't add anything, at least not to their story. That realization didn't hurt like I expected it to, it clarified things. It showed me the blueprint they'd been using all these years. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to redraw myself to fit their structure. Instead, I started drawing something of my own. You see, once you recognize the pattern, you can start to break it. You can stop editing yourself just to survive. And you can start planning. Not petty revenge. Not childish tantrums. But something clean, something sharp, something so bold it makes them stop and say, wait, what just happened? I wasn't sure yet what that thing would be. But I knew it had to be big. Bigger than a comment. Bigger than a phone call. Something they couldn't crop, couldn't spin, couldn't pretend away. Because if they weren't going to give me a seat at the table, then I was going to build my own table and light it up in a way they could never ignore. And this time, I'd be right in the center of the picture. I think the worst kind of loneliness is the one you carry in a crowded room, the kind that doesn't announce itself with tears or tantrums, but instead sits quietly at the bottom of your stomach like a rock, making everything you do feel slightly heavier, slightly harder, slightly more pointless. For years, decades even, that was the flavor of my existence within my own family. Not dramatic estrangement, not outright cruelty, but something subtler and much harder to name. It was being tolerated rather than loved, being included out of obligation rather than desire, being allowed in but never truly welcomed. And over time, the weight of all those quiet exclusions began to bend something in me, not enough to break, but enough to change the shape of who I was. I was the kind of daughter who didn't argue when Mom changed dinner plans at the last minute without telling me, who didn't make a fuss when they forgot my birthday dinner 3 years in a row, and who still showed up with a pie and a smile every Thanksgiving, even when there weren't enough chairs and no one seemed to notice or care that I stood while I ate. I was the one who picked Dad up from outpatient surgery when Becca was too busy with a school fundraiser, the one who drove an hour to help Mom move her garden pots inside before a frost, the one who sent holiday cards by hand every year even though I never got one back. And the worst part? I thought that's what love was supposed to look like, giving without expecting, showing up without being asked, making yourself small so others could shine brighter. But love without recognition isn't love at all. It's servitude dressed up in Hallmark sentiment, and once you realize that, it becomes impossible to unsee. What surprised me most, once I allowed myself to see things clearly, was how long I had clung to the fantasy that things would change. I kept waiting for some seismic moment, maybe a health scare or a dramatic family argument, where the truth would spill out and everything would finally be acknowledged, where someone would finally say, "Karen, I'm sorry we made you feel invisible." But the truth is, that moment never comes for people like me, because families like mine survive on silence, on a shared commitment to keep things nice and tidy on the outside, no matter how much rot is growing underneath. And the longer you wait for someone else to change the story, the more you disappear from your own life. So I stopped waiting. It happened in stages. I started saying no to things, not loudly or dramatically, but with a calm finality that startled even me. When Becca invited me to her middle child's birthday party last spring, I declined, citing work, though in truth I had nothing to do that day but read and breathe and enjoy not being around people who drained me. When Mom texted asking if I could pick up a cake for church volunteers, I told her I wasn't available. And when Dad forgot my birthday again, I didn't call to remind him. I let the silence speak for me. But withdrawal wasn't enough. Stepping back from their story still left me in the same place, an empty page in someone else's scrapbook. I wanted more than distance. I wanted visibility. I wanted to create something that couldn't be ignored, something that would flip the narrative completely, not just for my family, but for anyone who had ever been pushed to the edges of someone else's life until they ceased to matter. That's when I remembered something my boss once told me in a meeting I'd led for a product campaign 2 years ago. We were discussing a series of ads that hadn't landed well, and he leaned across the table and said, "Karen, your ideas are good, but they're quiet. Sometimes you need to be loud in a way that feels like truth." At the time, I had nodded, taking it as a critique of my marketing tone. But now, sitting alone in my apartment with folders of family photos open on my desktop like crime scene evidence, I heard those words differently. Maybe it wasn't just about selling products. Maybe it was about reclaiming presence. I work in marketing, specifically digital campaigns and branded visibility, which means I know things the average person doesn't. I know how to buy attention, how to design a message that can't be scrolled past, and how to turn a single image into a conversation. So I started sketching out ideas, not as revenge, not as an emotional outburst, but as a campaign. A carefully crafted, strategic, public unveiling. I wanted to do something big, something bold, something they couldn't brush off with a patronizing smile or a dismissive wave. I wanted to put myself in a place so large, so visible, that it would force them and everyone else to see me not as the awkward extra in their perfect pictures, but as the main character of my own story. And so the plan took shape. A single photograph, just me, taken not in some sad, desperate selfie, but with intention, with elegance, with power. I booked a photographer, not one of those stiff Sears-style professionals, but a woman I found on Instagram who specialized in portraits of women over 50 who had reclaimed themselves. That was her whole brand, helping women who had been overlooked feel iconic. We spent an entire afternoon in a studio downtown. She did my makeup, fixed my hair, styled me in clothing I didn't think I had the right to wear. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt present. Real. Worthy. The photo we chose was simple, just me in a navy blouse, arms crossed, chin lifted, looking directly into the camera. No smile. No apology. Just clarity. Underneath, in small, bold white text, it read, "Not invisible anymore." And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I bought a billboard. Not just any billboard. I bought digital screen space in Times Square, just 15 seconds every hour for 1 week, scheduled during peak foot traffic, targeted to coincide with the holiday rush when people were most likely to be taking photos, sharing stories, looking up. It cost me nearly half my savings. I didn't care. I scheduled it to begin the day after Becca's Christmas party, the one I wasn't invited to this year, though she sent a blanket text wishing me joy and warmth. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because this time, I wouldn't be cropped. I wouldn't be hidden behind someone else's story. This time, when people looked up, they'd see me. Just me. Not a placeholder. Not an afterthought. A woman who had finally decided she'd had enough of being edited out. I arrived in New York City 2 days before the billboard was set to go live, not because I needed to, technically speaking, but because I felt this nagging compulsion to be physically present, to stand in the same space where the image of my own reclamation would rise. Larger than life, in one of the most photographed, documented, and watched places on the planet. The city was buzzing in that pre-Christmas chaos that somehow felt both thrilling and grotesque, where tourists packed into every sidewalk crevice like sardines in department store scarves, and locals moved with irritated precision around them, clutching coffee cups and deadlines. I checked into a modest hotel 6 blocks away from Times Square, the kind of place that had once been trendy, but now smelled vaguely of carpet shampoo and nostalgia, and I sat on the edge of the bed for almost an hour, staring at the little folder in my hands that held the final confirmation, date, time slot, image approval, everything finalized. Everything done. There was no going back. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not because anyone would recognize me, but because I needed to feel deliberate, intentional, as if my clothes could serve as armor against the surreal nature of what was about to happen. I wore the same navy blouse from the photo, paired with black slacks, Heeled boots I rarely had the nerve to wear in public, and a long dark coat that gave me the strange feeling of being both anonymous and somehow theatrical. I didn't tell a soul where I was going. Not Becca. Not Mom. Not anyone from work. No one knew but me and the marketing coordinator, who had sent me the final scheduling email and wished me luck with your campaign. As if this were some kind of brand launch, and not the culmination of a lifetime of silence, finally being broken by a single still image. I arrived at Times Square just before 11 in the morning, weaving through the crowds with my hands buried deep in my pockets, heart thudding with something between panic and anticipation. The screen was located on the corner of 47th and Broadway, a prime vertical digital panel that faced the flow of foot traffic with impossible clarity. I stood across the street from it, pretending to examine the menu of a hot dog vendor, when I saw the screen flicker, shift, and then there it was. Me. My breath caught so suddenly I had to remind myself to exhale. For 15 full seconds, the world paused. My face, centered and still, dominated the screen with a power I never imagined I was capable of. The lighting was perfect, the color sharp, and the words, those four, simple, devastating words, hung beneath me like a verdict, a confession, and a war cry all at once. Not invisible anymore. People looked up, as they always do in Times Square, but this time I watched their eyes linger, not in confusion or derision, but in something else. Curiosity. Recognition. Maybe even admiration. A woman next to me muttered to her friend, "That's kind of badass," and I felt the corners of my mouth twitch in what might have been a smile, or maybe just the release of something that had been clenched inside me for too long. I didn't cry. I didn't take a selfie. I didn't rush up to anyone and say, "That's me up there." I just stood still, silent, and completely present in the fact that for the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I stayed for 3 more cycles, watching as my image returned each hour, surrounded by the constant churn of advertising and noise, and yet somehow cutting through all of it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was unmistakably there. And that was the point. I didn't need flashing lights or a viral hashtag. I just needed to occupy space that couldn't be edited, couldn't be cropped, couldn't be filtered out of someone else's story. That afternoon, I took the subway to the Upper West Side, found a quiet cafe near Central Park, and ordered a cup of coffee so hot it scalded my tongue. I pulled out my phone, hesitated, and then opened the family group chat. I hadn't messaged in weeks. The last time was a comment on a baby photo from Becca's daughter, and even that had gone without a single like or reply. I didn't attach the billboard photo. I didn't send a link or try to explain. I simply wrote, "If you're in New York this week, look up." Then I turned the phone over and didn't check it again for hours. The responses came in slow waves. Becca was first. "What does that mean?" Then, 2 hours later, "Are you in New York?" Followed by a photo she must have found online, a tourist snapshot of the billboard, me looming over the crowd, the caption clearly visible beneath my face. No filter. No cropping. Just the raw truth of it. She didn't reply after that. Then came Mom's message, a longer one as expected, trying to disguise confusion as concern. "Karen, why didn't you tell us you were doing this? Are you okay?" I didn't answer. What could I possibly say that I hadn't already communicated louder than words? Dad, predictably, said nothing. By that evening, the billboard had been shared on 2 different social media accounts, one belonging to a photography blogger who commented on the striking simplicity of the self-portrait, and another from a motivational speaker who captioned it, "You go. Whoever you are." The attention was small, but sincere, and it was already more validation than I had received from my own blood in years. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the skyline, blinking against the blur of city lights that shimmered like scattered embers. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. There was no rush of vengeance or satisfaction, no cinematic swell of music in my head. What I felt was quieter, heavier, and in some strange way, lonelier than before. Because now I knew exactly how much I had been missing, not just love or attention, but visibility, the simple human need to be seen. They had erased me for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to exist fully. And now that I had given myself that gift, the cost of its absence was almost unbearable. Still, I had no regrets. Because this wasn't about making them feel guilty or proving anything to people who had spent decades pretending I didn't matter. This was about one thing and one thing only, reminding myself that I did. That I always had. Even if no one clapped. Even if no one said sorry. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is to stand completely still and refuse to vanish. And I wasn't vanishing anymore. The funny thing about clarity is that once you have it, once it settles into your bones and rewires your perception, it doesn't grant you peace the way people promise it will. Instead, it sharpens everything to such an excruciating edge that the conversations you used to endure silently now sound deafening in their absurdity. The gestures you used to accept as kindness now reek of condescension. And the people you once yearned to please begin to appear like strangers who only ever knew the most muted version of you, because that's the version they needed to keep their story intact. Returning home after New York felt, in many ways, more jarring than the billboard itself, because suddenly I was re-entering the same spaces, the same routines, and the same family, but I was no longer the same woman. The silence, at first, was almost comical. A few texts from Becca trickled in the day after the billboard went viral on a few more niche blogs and LinkedIn posts, messages wrapped in saccharine civility, all pretending she wasn't furious, all full of half-hearted attempts at checking in, as though I had just posted a mildly controversial opinion and not declared my lifelong exclusion in 20 feet of backlit truth. She wanted to know if I was all right, if I needed to talk, if maybe I'd like to come over next weekend for a quiet dinner, which was code for a sanitized intervention. The kind where they let me say just enough to feel heard, but not enough to disturb their version of history. I didn't respond. I didn't owe them that anymore. But they didn't let it rest. A few days later, the confrontation I'd been expecting finally arrived, not through text or phone call, but through a knock on my door one rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind of dreary, cold day that usually kept people huddled in their own corners of the world. I opened the door and found Becca standing there, face taut with the kind of artificial concern that's more about managing perception than expressing real empathy. Holding a bottle of cheap Chardonnay like it was some peace offering in a war she still didn't understand she'd started decades ago. Behind her, slightly soaked and visibly uncomfortable, stood our mother, her coat too thin for the weather, her hair clinging to her face, her eyes starting with that frantic confusion only people who've lost control of the narrative exhibit. I should have told them to leave, I know that. I should have protected the small sanctuary I had carved out of my life, the one place where I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing, but something in me, some old reflex of politeness or masochism, stepped back and let them in. They hovered near the threshold for a moment, as if unsure whether they were entering a stranger's house or the scene of a crime, and then finally sat down on the couch, perching like guests rather than family. The conversation began, as I'd predicted, with disclaimers. Becca did most of the talking at first, explaining how the billboard had shocked them, how it had felt, out of nowhere, how it had made people ask questions, and how she wasn't mad, exactly, but concerned about what message I was trying to send, about how this would look to others, about why I felt the need to go public with something so personal. She spoke in that careful tone of someone who wants to appear open-minded while staying firmly in control, and the entire time she kept glancing at Mom, who nodded with increasing fervor, like a backup singer waiting for her cue. It wasn't until Becca finally said the phrase, "I just wish you had come to us first," that I felt something inside me unravel, not violently, but with an almost surgical precision. I looked at them, really looked at them, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel small in their presence. I didn't feel like a difficult daughter or a bitter sister. I felt like a mirror they had spent 50 years avoiding, and now they were being forced to look. So I spoke, not with rage or hysteria, not with cruelty or theatrics, but with the calm, deliberate cadence of someone who has nothing left to lose. I told them about the years of erasure, the photos, the birthdays, the holidays where I sat quietly in the kitchen while the real family posed for pictures. I told them how I stopped speaking up because it never made a difference, how every time I tried to assert myself, the conversation was redirected or minimized or twisted into a joke. I told them how tired I was of performing gratitude for scraps of attention, how sick I was of being praised for being easy, when what they really meant was easy to ignore. I watched their faces shift, Becca's first, turning defensive and red, her mouth tightening into a line so thin it could cut glass, Mom's second, as the tears started to well up, not from understanding or regret, but from being confronted with something too uncomfortable to pretend away. She murmured things like, "We didn't know, and that was never the intention, and we love you," but none of it felt like love. It felt like damage control, like she was trying to duct tape over a leak in a dam that had already broken. And then I said something I hadn't planned to say, something that rose from a place so deep inside me it startled even myself. I told them I didn't do it for them. I didn't create that photo or rent that screen or stand in the cold for hours to hurt them. I did it because I was tired of waiting for someone else to give me permission to exist. I did it because I wanted to see myself full and unedited, in a space that no one could crop. I did it because, for the first time in my life, I believed I deserved to be seen. They didn't understand. Not really. They nodded, and they apologized, and they cried a little, and they said all the right things, but I could tell none of it landed where it was supposed to. They wanted resolution, a clean ending, a forgiveness arc they could point to during next Christmas dinner when someone asked why I wasn't there. But I wasn't interested in clean endings anymore. Life didn't owe me that, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. They left shortly after, the bottle of wine still unopened on the table, the couch cushions slightly dented where they had sat, the air heavy with a silence that would probably last for months, maybe years, maybe forever. I didn't follow them out. I didn't watch their car pull away. I just stood there in my hallway, staring at the closed door, and for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel the urge to open it. Because this wasn't the end of anything. It wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something murkier, something more honest, a boundary. I had drawn a line they couldn't erase. And whether they liked it or not, I had finally stepped out of the background. Not for them. For me.